The governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses claims to have been appointed by Jesus to be his faithful and discreet slave. This, supposedly, was what Jesus meant by his words appearing at Matthew chapter 24 verses 45 through 47.
At Matthew 24, 45 to 47, we read that for the time of the end, Jesus would appoint a faithful and discreet slave, or governing body, to explain the Bible to his followers and help them to grow in understanding of the truth.
However, when we actually read the verses, there are a few words in Gerrit Losch's description that do not appear.
Who really is the faithful and discreet slave, whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on coming finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings.
As you can see, there are 4 concepts introduced that Jesus did not say. That the slave would, 1. Be appointed in the time of the end. 2. Be a governing body. 3. Explain the Bible. 4. Help his followers to grow in understanding of the truth. Without these concepts, there is simply no way for a modern-day group of men to claim they have been authorized by Jesus to explain the Bible for Christians. Furthermore, since Jesus raised a question, the pronouncement of the slave as faithful would only be made by Jesus, at his future coming, after examining how the slave handled his assignment. In the March 15, 2015 Watchtower we find this excellent reasoning.
A simpler approach to Jesus illustrations. Paragraph 13, question. What examples show that we now explain some of Jesus' illustrations in a simpler, clearer way? Jesus Christ was the greatest teacher ever to walk this earth. One of his favorite teaching methods involved the use of illustrations. Illustrations paint vivid word pictures that stimulate the mind and reach the heart. Has our literature also come to explain Jesus' illustrations in a simpler, clearer way over the years? The answer is unmistakably yes. Were we not thrilled to gain a clarified understanding of Jesus' illustrations regarding the leaven, the mustard seed, and the dragnet in the Watchtower of July 15, 2008? We now see clearly that these illustrations apply to God's kingdom and its phenomenal success in gathering true followers of Christ out of this wicked world. What, though, about the more detailed stories or parables that Jesus related? Some, of course, are symbolic and prophetic. Others emphasize practical lessons. But which is which? Through the years, the answer has gradually become clearer. For instance, consider the way we have explained Jesus' parable of the neighborly Samaritan. In 1924, the Watchtower said that the Samaritan pictured Jesus. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho, which ran downhill, pictured mankind's downward course since the rebellion in Eden. The thieves on the road pictured giant corporations and profiteers, and the priest and the Levite typified ecclesiastical systems. Today, our literature uses that illustration to remind all Christians that we must be impartial in rendering aid to those in need, especially in a spiritual sense. Does it not make us happy to see that Jehovah makes his teachings clear to us?
Should not this simpler approach be applied to the illustration of the faithful and discreet as well? Will an examination of this parable show it to be symbolic and prophetic? Or will it show that it emphasizes a practical lesson? To help us in answering that question, let us consider a parallel passage found in Luke chapter 12, where the gospel writer relates more detail.
And the Lord said,
Who really is the faithful steward, the discreet one, whom his master will appoint over his body of attendants to keep giving them their measure of food supplies at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on coming finds him doing so. I tell you truthfully, he will appoint him over all his belongings. But if ever that slave should say in his heart, "My master delays coming," and starts to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that slave will come on a day that he is not expecting him, and at an hour that he does not know, and he will punish him with the greatest severity, and assign him a part with the unfaithful ones. Then that slave who understood the will of his master, but did not get ready, or do what he asked, will be beaten with many strokes. But the one who did not understand, and yet did things deserving of strokes, will be beaten with few. Indeed, everyone to whom much was given, much will be demanded of him, and the one who is put in charge of much will have more than usual demanded of him.
Here, we see that the slave is referred to as a steward. Do any of the four concepts introduced by Gerrit Loesch appear here? Is there any indication that the appointment of the slave will be in the distant future? Does Jesus say that there is only one steward, a person or a composite elite body whom he appoints over his followers? Is there anything here said about explaining the Bible or helping others to grow in understanding of the truth? Note how Jesus refers to the steward that proved to be either faithful or unfaithful. In verse 47, Jesus refers to that slave who understood the will of his master.
Then that slave who understood the will of his master, but did not get ready, or do what he asked, will be beaten with many strokes.
At verse 48, Jesus differentiates that slave from the one who did not understand.
But the one who did not understand, and yet did things deserving of strokes, will be beaten with few. Indeed, everyone to whom much was given, much will be demanded of him, and the one who is put in charge of much will have more than usual demanded of him.
It should be obvious that one person, or one composite steward, cannot simultaneously understand and not understand what is expected of him. Hence, by saying these things, it is obvious that Jesus is speaking of individuals who have a stewardship. The level of knowledge that an individual steward has, as well as the level of responsibility he has been given, will determine the degree of that person's accountability. However, there is more to the context that can aid our understanding of this parable. Just prior to this, Jesus had given another parable.
Be dressed and ready, and have your lamps burning, and you should be like men waiting for their master to return from the marriage, so when he comes and knocks, they may at once open to him. Happy are those slaves whom the master on coming finds watching. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at the table, and will come alongside and minister to them. And if he comes in the second watch, even if in the third, and finds them ready, happy are they. But know this, if the householder had known at what hour the thief would come, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also, keep ready, because at an hour that you do not think likely, the Son of Man is coming.
Then Peter said,
Lord, are you telling this illustration just to us, or also to everyone?
It is obvious Peter understood that Jesus' illustration was for the benefit of all the disciples that were present. He did not understand Jesus to be speaking of either one person, or a composite group, that would appear sometime in the distant future. However, he wasn't quite sure whether Jesus' words were meant solely for those who had followed him, or also included the crowd that was listening. Rather than answer Peter's question directly, Jesus gives this parable. But whether or not Jesus' words were for just the disciples, or were meant to include the crowd, many of whom would later become disciples, the fact that there are three possible situations, within the one narrative, clearly indicates that Jesus was speaking of more than just one composite slave. Hence, it appears the answer to Peter's question is that Jesus was speaking to all. Those who were already his disciples, as well as to those who would become such, for how could just one slave both understand and not understand simultaneously? How could just one slave be put in charge of much and not in charge of much simultaneously? Furthermore, Jesus' words were a warning for them to keep faithful to their commission until his return. Not a pronouncement of them as already being considered faithful and discreet. Nor was it a prophecy. Indeed, how is it possible for a prophecy to have more than one outcome? Remember, Jesus spoke of 1. That slave who understood the will of his master but did not get ready. 2. The one who did not understand and yet did things deserving of strokes. 3. The one who was put in charge of much will have more than usual demanded of him, an indication that some might not be put in charge of as much. Hence, it appears the answer to Peter's question is that Jesus was speaking to all. Those who were already his disciples, as well as to those who would become such, for how could just one slave both understand and not understand simultaneously? How could just one slave be put in charge of much and not in charge of much simultaneously? Much can be learned if we note other places this word steward appears in the Scriptures. For example, Paul's words in 1 Corinthians.
A man should regard us as attendants of Christ and stewards of God's sacred secrets. In this regard, what is expected of stewards is that they be found faithful.
If you examine this passage in context, individuals such as Paul, Peter and Apollos are referred to as stewards. In his letter, Paul was writing to address the problem of sectarian division among the brothers in Corinth.
For some from the house of Chloe have informed me regarding you, my brothers, that there are dissensions among you. What I mean is this, that each one of you says, I belong to Paul, but I to Apollos, but I to Cephas, but I to Christ.
This is the subject of his letter up until the end of chapter 4.
What then is Apollos? Yes, what is Paul? Ministers through whom you became believers, just as the Lord granted each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God kept making it grow, so that neither is the one who plants anything, nor is the one who waters, but God who makes it grow. Now the one who plants and the one who waters are one, but each person will receive his own reward according to his own work. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field under cultivation, God's building. So let no one boast in men, for all things belong to you, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things now here or things to come. All things belong to you. In turn, you belong to Christ. Christ, in turn, belongs to God.
Instead of admiring personalities to the extent of becoming followers of men, Paul admonished the Corinthians to follow Christ. In regard to the stewardship of Paul, Apollos, Cephas and others, it was required that they be found faithful. This echoes what Jesus said in his parable about the faithful and discreet slave. But did Paul indicate that he already thought of himself as a faithful steward? Note what he says next.
Now to me, it is of very little importance to be examined by you or by a human tribunal. In fact, I do not even examine myself, for I am not conscious of anything against myself. But by this I am not proved righteous. The one who examines me is Jehovah. Therefore, do not judge anything before the due time, until the Lord comes. He will bring the secret things of darkness to light, and make known the intentions of the hearts, and then each one will receive his praise from God.
Instead of proclaiming himself a faithful steward, Paul showed that this would not be determined by himself or any other person. It would be the Lord himself who would make that judgment when the time came. So, to personally judge themselves or anyone else as faithful and trustworthy, or to go beyond the things that were written under inspiration of Holy Spirit, would be the height of arrogance. But were only men like Paul and Apollos stewards? Notice Titus 1:7 where it mentions the qualifications for overseers.
For as God's steward, an overseer must be free from accusation, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not a drunkard, not violent, not greedy of dishonest gain.
So, Christian overseers are viewed as being stewards. Thus, Jesus' parable of the steward would apply to them as well. But would this apply only to such overseers? Note what the Apostle Peter said.
To the extent that each one has received a gift, use it in ministering to one another as fine stewards of God's undeserved kindness that is expressed in various ways. If anyone speaks, let him do so as speaking pronouncements from God. If anyone ministers, let him do so as depending on the strength that God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. The glory and the might are His, forever and ever. Amen.
Peter, writing to the entire congregation, understood each individual Christian to be a steward and entrusted with a gift that they can use to serve others. The admonition here is to strive to be a fine steward. If anyone, meaning each individual Christian, speaks or serves in any capacity, they should do so in a way that brings glory to God. The Watchtower Society recognizes that in the Bible, all Christians are referred to as stewards. Note how this is stated in a December 2012 Watchtower article.
You are a trusted steward. Theme text: You do not belong to yourselves. 1 Corinthians 6:19. Listen for the answers to these questions. What was the role of ancient stewards? What responsibilities do all stewards of God share? How should we view the stewardship entrusted to us? Paragraph 1. Question: The world in general has what view of independence? Some 2,500 years ago, a Greek playwright wrote, "No one willingly wears the yoke of slavery." Many today would readily agree with that statement. Slavery evokes images of people oppressed and in bondage, whose work and sacrifices bring benefits not to themselves, but to those who own and dominate them. Paragraphs 2 and 3. Question A. What position do willing slaves or servants of Christ enjoy? Question B. What questions about stewardship will we consider? Yet, Jesus indicated that His disciples would be humble servants or slaves. There is nothing demeaning or oppressive, though, about this slavery involving true Christians. These slaves enjoy a position of honor, trust, and respect. Consider, for example, the comments Jesus made about one slave shortly before his death. Christ foretold that He would assign duties to a faithful and discreet slave. Matthew 24:45-47. It is significant that in a parallel account, that slave is called a steward. Luke 12:42-44 reads, "And the Lord said, 'Who really is the faithful steward, the discreet one, whom his master will appoint over his body of attendants to keep giving them their measure of food supplies at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on arriving finds him doing so. I tell you truthfully, he will appoint him over all his belongings.'" Most faithful Christians now alive are not members of that faithful steward class. However, the Scriptures show that all who serve God have a stewardship. What responsibilities are involved? How should those be viewed? To find out, let us examine the role of stewards in ancient times.
Although recognizing the Bible teaches that all Christians are stewards, the Watchtower still wants to say that Jesus promised to give a preeminent position to one particular steward, a composite one, in the future. Why?
But you, do not you be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, and all of you are brothers. Moreover, do not call anyone your father on earth, for one is your Father, the heavenly one. Neither be called leaders, for your leader is one, the Christ. But the greatest one among you must be your minister. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted."
In the book of Matthew, Jesus follows up the parable of the faithful slave in the 24th chapter with the parable of the wise and foolish virgins in chapter 25. Then the parable of the talents. Then the parable of the sheep and the goats. Each of these parables is saying the same thing again and again but in different ways using the same pattern. Note, in particular, the parable of the talents. Jesus did not entrust everything to a single slave. Rather he gave each according to his own ability. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and then finally 1 talent to the last slave. When it came time to render accounts, some proved to be faithful over a few things and were judged good and faithful slaves and appointed over many things. But the one who showed himself to be unfaithful was called a wicked and sluggish slave. Again and again with back-to-back parables Jesus is emphasizing and re-emphasizing the same practical lesson. Individual Christians can either be like stewards that prove faithful and discreet or evil. Like virgins who are either discreet or foolish. Like slaves that are good and faithful or wicked and sluggish. Like sheep or like goats. It really is that simple. The reason why Jesus feels it is so important to make this point becomes apparent at the conclusion of the series of illustrations. Jesus would soon be cruelly taken away from them and they would be on their own. Not knowing the day, hour, time or season of his return would call upon them to maintain watchfulness, faithfulness. So, who really is the faithful and discreet slave? When reading these parables, each individual Christian, rather than presume, should ask themselves, will I prove to be faithful and discreet? Here I have attempted to outline, by sticking with the context of Jesus' discussion, an understanding of Jesus' parable of the faithful slave. Does it appear to harmonize with the scriptures? Or does it seriously contradict the Bible? Some might think such an approach reveals pride on my part, because this view differs from a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Moses makes a show of goodness and of compliance with Jehovah's will. He uses persuasion rather than force. And by his secret cunning he has become wickedly powerful, as it has exalted Aaron, his brother, in the same way.
Truly spoken!
Now it is proper for the people to punish such men, even while they think their wicked designs are concealed from us.
They should be punished!
Punish them all! Yes! Do not let them gain the strength until there's nothing left for them to do.
Do not allow that! Do not allow that!
You sons of Levi, hear me now. Is Moses able to give any just cause as to why he has bestowed a priesthood on Aaron and his sons? If God has determined to bestow that honor on one of the tribe of Levi, am I not also of that tribe?
A prince of Levi.
Though I would not take it upon myself the dignity of this high office, unless it were urged upon me by the people.
We must appoint a new head.
On the other hand, if God determined to bestow this honor on the tribe of the firstborn, then someone from the tribe of Reuben would have it justly. The Nathan and Abiram would have it. For they are the oldest men of the tribe of Reuben, men of great wealth, men of fame.
Moses!
That is enough of you, because the whole assembly are all of them holy, and Jehovah is in their midst. Why then should you lift yourselves up above the congregation of Jehovah?
But remember, Paul commended the Bereans for carefully checking what he, an inspired apostle, said, to make sure it was in harmony with the scriptures. Besides, Moses was an inspired prophet. Paul was inspired. The governing body is not.